Some lies don't arrive screaming, they lean in close and whisper. That was what I thought when Rachel stepped beside me at the family dinner and lowered her voice just enough so no one else could hear. The dining room was warm, lit by the soft glow of the chandelier my late husband Harold had installed 20 years ago, and the table was set with my best china, the white plates with the thin silver rim I only used for holidays or special gatherings. Michael was carving the roast at the head of the table, laughing about something from work, while the grandchildren argued over who got the last dinner roll. It looked like a postcard version of family. Rachel touched my elbow lightly. "May I speak to you for a second?" she asked, her smile never slipping. I followed her toward the hallway, past the framed photographs of Harold in his navy suit, Harold holding Michael as a baby, Harold standing in front of the lake house we sold years ago. She leaned closer, her perfume faint and powdery, and whispered, "I'm pregnant with your late husband's child." I did not step back. I did not gasp. I simply looked at her face and waited to see if she would smile, if she would admit it was a cruel joke delivered at the wrong time. She didn't. "I have proof," she added softly, her hand resting over her abdomen as if it were a shield. In the dining room, someone refilled a glass. A fork scraped against porcelain. The ordinary sounds of dinner continued, unaware that the air in the hallway had shifted by several degrees. "That's not possible," I said evenly. My voice surprised me. It was calm. Measured. Rachel tilted her head. "Harold and I had conversations you didn't know about," she replied. "Before he passed." She said it carefully, as if choosing each word from a shelf. I studied her eyes. There was no shame there. Only strategy. I thought about Harold's final year. The hospital visits. The specialists. The test results that filled a 3-inch binder I still kept in my desk. I remembered the oncologist explaining, in clear medical language, how certain treatments affect the body. I remembered Harold squeezing my hand and joking that at least he wouldn't be chasing toddlers in his 70s. Rachel must have mistaken my silence for fear. "If this becomes public," she continued quietly, "it could complicate the estate. The trust. Everything." There it was. Not grief. Not romance. Paperwork. I folded my hands in front of me. "Does Michael know about this?" I asked. She glanced toward the dining room. "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." That, too, was strategic. If I reacted poorly, she could frame me as unstable. If I reacted calmly, she could claim she had been transparent. I nodded once. "Dinner is getting cold," I said, and walked back to the table. Michael looked up at me. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. "Fine," I replied, taking my seat. Rachel followed a moment later, her expression composed. She reached for her water glass with steady fingers. I watched her through the reflection in the window behind her. Outside, the backyard stretched quiet and dark, the maple tree swaying slightly in the October breeze. Harold had planted that tree the year Michael graduated high school. Time had a way of layering itself over truth until the original shape was almost invisible. "Mom," Michael said, slicing another piece of meat, "Rachel and I were thinking about expanding the house next year. Maybe adding a nursery someday." He laughed lightly. Rachel smiled at him, a small secret tucked behind her lips. Nursery. The word hovered in the air. I lifted my napkin and dabbed at the corner of my mouth. "That sounds like a big decision," I said. "We're ready," Rachel replied. "Family is everything." Family. I looked at Harold's empty chair at the end of the table. No one had moved it since he passed. It remained there out of habit, or respect, or perhaps denial. I thought about the trust documents Harold and I had signed 2 years before his diagnosis. The clause about direct heirs. The stipulation requiring verified lineage for any additional beneficiary added after his death. Harold had been meticulous. He believed in records. In signatures. In proof. I did not accuse Rachel. I did not challenge her in front of my son. Instead, I asked for more gravy. I complimented the roasted carrots. I listened to Michael describe a new investment property 2 counties over. The dinner ended the way most family dinners do, dishes stacked in the sink, leftovers wrapped in foil, grandchildren yawning in oversized sweaters. As Rachel gathered her purse, she paused beside me again. "We'll talk soon," she murmured. "About what this means." I met her gaze. "Yes," I said. "We will." After the front door closed and the house returned to its natural silence, I walked to my study and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. The binder was still there. So were the copies of the trust. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper, steady and precise. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the siding of the house Harold built with his own hands. Some lies announce themselves with drama. Others arrive like this, soft, calculated, wrapped in possibility. I turned on the lamp, sat down in my chair, and began to read. I did not sleep that night. I did not cry either. I sat at the desk in Harold's study until well past midnight, the small brass lamp casting a circle of light over the binder that held the last year of his medical records. Outside, the street was quiet. A car passed once, its headlights sliding briefly across the living room wall before disappearing. I opened the binder and turned the pages slowly, not searching for comfort but for clarity. The dates were precise. The treatments were documented in detail. The oncologist's notes were clinical and unmistakable. Certain therapies, he had explained more than once, made biological fatherhood highly unlikely during that period. Harold had listened carefully. He had asked questions. He had signed forms acknowledging the information. I remembered sitting beside him in that small examination room, the paper crinkling under him as he shifted in the chair, his hand warm in mine. We had faced facts together. We had never hidden from them. I closed the binder and placed it neatly back in the drawer. If Rachel believed she could rewrite medical history with a whisper in a hallway, she had underestimated something important. She had underestimated memory. The next morning, I rose at 6:30 as usual. I made coffee. I watered the plants on the kitchen windowsill. I did not rush. I did not call anyone in anger. Instead, I retrieved the trust documents from the fireproof safe in the closet. Harold had insisted on that safe after he retired. He said paper was only powerful if it was protected. The trust was 28 pages long. I had read it before, but that morning I read it differently. I read it as someone preparing for a storm reads a weather map. The clause was still there, on page 17. Any beneficiary claiming lineage after the date of the settler's death must submit to independent verification as determined by the trustee. Harold had chosen a neutral third-party law firm to oversee such matters. Not Rachel's uncle. Not anyone with a personal connection. I traced the sentence with my finger. Independent verification. Clear language. No ambiguity. Around 9:15, my phone vibrated. It was Michael. I let it ring once before answering. "Good morning, Mom," he said, his voice careful. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," I replied. "How are you?" There was a pause. "Rachel told me she spoke with you last night," he continued. "About the pregnancy." He said the word slowly, as if testing it. "She did," I answered. Silence stretched between us. I could hear traffic in the background on his end. Perhaps he was already driving to work. "Mom, I know this sounds complicated," he said, "but Rachel would not make something like that up." I looked at the maple tree outside the window, its leaves turning gold at the edges. "Complicated situations require clear facts," I said evenly. "Not assumptions." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," I replied, "that before anyone discusses estates or trust distributions, there will be proper documentation. Independent documentation." He exhaled. "Rachel said you seemed calm." "I am calm," I said. "Calm does not mean unaware." Another pause. Are you questioning her? He asked quietly. I chose my words with care. I am questioning the timing, I said. And the implications. He did not respond immediately. I imagined him gripping the steering wheel, jaw set, trying to balance loyalty to his wife with loyalty to his mother. She feels like you do not trust her, he said at last. Trust, I replied, is strengthened by transparency. After we ended the call, I placed the phone on the counter and stared at it for a moment. Rachel had moved quickly. She had framed the narrative before I had spoken a single public word. That was not emotion. That was preparation. Around 11 o'clock, I drove to the county clerk's office. The building was plain brick, built in the 1970s, with fluorescent lights and beige tile floors. I requested certified copies of Harold's final death certificate and the trust registration. Confirmation. The clerk behind the counter recognized my name. I am sorry for your loss, she said softly as she handed me the paperwork. Thank you, I replied. Loss did not fade with time. It settled. It changed shape. Back in my car, I reviewed the dates again. Harold had passed away on April 3rd. Rachel claimed conception before that date. During a period when Harold had been in and out of treatment, fatigued, monitored, rarely alone. I did not allow anger to surface. Anger clouds judgment. Instead, I made a list on a small notepad. Medical timeline. Travel records. Security system logs from the house. Bank statements indicating Rachel's recent inquiries about the trust. I remembered an email from 6 months earlier when Rachel had asked casually about updating beneficiaries in case of future children. At the time, I had appreciated her forward thinking. Now, the memory felt different. I returned home just after noon. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. I placed the documents neatly on the dining table where the previous evening's dinner had unfolded so effortlessly. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the empty chairs. Some lies collapse under confrontation. Others require exposure. If Rachel wanted this story told, it would be told correctly. And this time, it would not be whispered in a hallway. The following week unfolded with a kind of surface normalcy that would have fooled anyone watching from the outside. I went to the grocery store on Tuesday morning, selected the same brand of oatmeal, compared prices on fresh salmon, and spoke briefly with Mrs. Donnelly from 2 houses down about the early frost that had settled over our lawns. I returned home, placed the receipts in the small envelope I kept in the kitchen drawer, and sat at the dining table where the documents from the county clerk remained aligned in a careful stack. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the ticking of the wall clock in the hallway. At 10:30, the doorbell rang. I did not need to look through the peephole to know it was Rachel. When I opened the door, she stood there in a cream-colored coat, her hair pulled back neatly, one hand resting lightly against her abdomen as if to reinforce the narrative she had begun. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked into the living room and glanced around as though assessing the room, as though measuring what might soon be hers. I did not offer coffee. I did not offer tea. I sat across from her in Harold's armchair, leaving the sofa for her. "Michael is worried," she began. "He feels like you are building walls instead of supporting us." I folded my hands in my lap. "Support requires truth," I said calmly. "And clarity." She exhaled softly. "I told you, I have proof," she replied. "There were private conversations between your husband and me before he passed." The phrasing was careful again. Private conversations. It suggested intimacy without describing anything improper. It invited imagination without providing evidence. When exactly did these conversations occur? I asked. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Late winter," she answered. "In March." I nodded once. March had been one of Harold's most difficult months. Hospital visits every other day. Home health nurses monitoring medication schedules. I kept my expression neutral. "And you are certain about your timeline?" I asked. Yes, she said firmly. Very certain. I rose from my chair and walked to the dining table. I returned with a thin folder and placed it gently on the coffee table between us. These are copies of Harold's treatment logs from February and March, I said. They document his appointments, medications, and physical limitations. Rachel looked at the folder but did not open it. I do not need to review medical charts, she said coolly. I know what happened. I studied her face. There was no embarrassment. Only persistence. There is a clause in the trust, I continued evenly, requiring independent verification for any claim made after Harold's death. That verification will be handled by the firm listed in the document, not by relatives or friends. Her jaw tightened slightly. You think I am lying, she said. I think, I replied, that serious claims require serious evidence. She shifted on the sofa. If you force this into a legal battle, it will damage the family, she warned quietly. Michael will be devastated. I did not raise my voice. Michael deserves accuracy, I said. Not confusion. For the first time, a flicker of frustration crossed her expression. You always underestimate me, she said. You assume I do not understand how these things work. On the contrary, I answered. I believe you understand. Exactly how they work. The room felt smaller then, the air heavier. Outside, a delivery truck drove past, its engine humming steadily before fading away. Rachel leaned forward. If this child is recognized, she said, it changes everything. The trust, the property, the legacy. Harold would have wanted that. I met her gaze directly. Do not speak for my husband, I said quietly. It was not anger that filled my voice. It was certainty. She sat back again, composing herself. You are making this harder than it needs to be, she said. All I am asking for is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement comes after verification, I replied. Not before. Silence settled between us, thick but controlled. She stood first. We will proceed then, she said, smoothing her coat. Formally. I walked her to the door. Before stepping outside, she paused. You may win on paper, she said softly. But you will lose your son. I held the door open. Truth does not compete with loyalty, I answered. It strengthens it. She gave me a long look, then stepped onto the porch. I closed the door gently behind her and turned the lock. I did not lean against the wood. I did not tremble. I returned to the dining table, gathered the medical records, and placed them back into the safe. Then I dialed the number of the independent law firm listed in the trust documents and requested a formal review meeting for the following week. As I set the phone down, the house felt steady again. Some storms announce themselves with thunder. Others begin with a whisper and grow only if allowed. I had no intention of allowing this one to grow unchecked. The meeting with the law firm was scheduled for Thursday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I arrived 10 minutes early, as I always did, and took a seat in the waiting area where the carpet was a muted shade of gray and the walls were lined with framed certificates in dark wood frames. The receptionist offered water. I declined politely. My purse rested neatly on my lap, the folder containing copies of Harold's medical records and the trust document placed inside with careful order. When Mr. Jonathan Mercer stepped into the lobby, he extended his hand and introduced himself in a voice that was calm and deliberate. He had kind eyes, but his posture suggested precision. Inside his office, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting a narrow beam across the polished desk. I explained the situation without embellishment. I described the conversation in the hallway, the claim Rachel had made, the implication regarding the trust. I did not speculate. I did not accuse. I laid out facts as if arranging pieces on a chessboard. Mr. Mercer listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back slightly in his chair. The clause is clear, he said. Any posthumous claim requires independent verification through court-approved procedures. Until that occurs, no amendment to the trust can be recognized. His words settled like steady ground beneath my feet. And if the claim is false? I asked. He folded his hands. Then it will be dismissed formally. Documentation protects everyone. I nodded once. Documentation. The same word Harold had trusted. Mr. Mercer explained the process in measured detail. A formal notice would be sent requesting medical confirmation of pregnancy. If confirmed, paternity testing would be arranged through a neutral medical facility. All results would be handled confidentially. It is not uncommon for inheritance disputes to surface after a death, he added gently. Emotions complicate judgment. I thought about Rachel's steady expression in my living room. That had not been emotion. That had been planning. After the meeting, I drove home along Maple Avenue, passing the small park where Michael had learned to ride his bicycle decades ago. The sky was pale blue, thin clouds drifting slowly as if nothing urgent existed in the world. Yet beneath that calm sky, a quiet shift was taking place inside my family. That evening, Michael called again. His voice sounded strained. Rachel received a notice from the firm, he said. She is upset. I expected that, I replied. There was a long pause. Mom, he said carefully, this feels like you are preparing for a fight. I stood at the kitchen counter, tracing the edge of the granite with my fingertip. I am preparing for clarity, I answered. There is a difference. He sighed softly. She feels attacked. Requesting evidence is not an attack, I said. It is responsibility. The silence that followed carried weight. I could almost hear the conflict moving through him, the quiet calculation of loyalty against logic. Did Dad ever mention anything like this to you? He asked finally. The question did not wound me. It steadied me. Your father discussed many things with me, I said. Secrets were not among them. After we ended the call, I walked into Harold's study and sat in his chair. The room still carried a faint scent of leather and old books. On the shelf above the desk sat a framed photograph of the three of us at Lake Erie 20 years ago. Michael had been 14, grinning into the wind. Harold stood tall beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder. I studied Harold's expression in that picture. There was integrity in his eyes. A kind of quiet strength that did not require performance. Rachel had suggested that Harold had private conversations with her in late winter. Late winter had been filled with hospital appointments, nurse visits, careful monitoring. I remembered driving him to treatment sessions in freezing rain, helping him into the house afterward, watching him fall asleep in his recliner from exhaustion. There had been no secret evenings. No unexplained absences. Facts do not change because someone whispers otherwise. The following morning, an email arrived from the law firm confirming that formal documentation had been requested from Rachel's physician. The tone was neutral. Procedural. Precise. I printed the email and placed it in a new folder labeled October Review. I was not building a case against a daughter-in-law. I was building a record of truth. That afternoon, Rachel sent a text message. It was brief. You are forcing this into something ugly. I read it once and set the phone down. I did not respond immediately. Words sent in haste often create more confusion than silence. Instead, I walked outside and stood beneath the maple tree Harold had planted. The leaves had begun to fall, collecting in small golden piles across the lawn. Change does not ask permission. It arrives, settles, and waits to see who will stand firm. I looked up at the branches and allowed myself one steady breath. If Rachel believed this would intimidate me into retreat, she did not understand the difference between noise and strength. The process had begun. And this time, nothing would remain in the shadows. By Monday morning the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were waiting for an outcome. The law firm sent confirmation that Rachel had acknowledged the request for medical documentation but had asked for additional time, citing emotional distress. I read the email twice, then placed it neatly into the October Review folder. Emotional distress was not a medical record. It was not a laboratory result. It was not proof. That afternoon Michael came by without calling first. I saw his car pull into the driveway and felt a steady tightening in my chest, not from fear, but from the understanding that this moment would test him. When he entered the house, he did not remove his coat right away. He stood near the entryway, hands in his pockets, looking at the framed photographs on the wall. "Mom," he began, his voice low, "this is getting out of control." I gestured toward the living room. "Sit," I said gently. He remained standing. "Rachel feels humiliated," he continued. "She thinks you are treating her like a criminal." I walked to the window and adjusted the curtain slightly, letting more afternoon light into the room. "Requesting verification is not humiliation," I said evenly. "It is procedure." He shook his head. "You know what people will think if this becomes public." I turned to face him fully. "Truth does not fear being seen," I replied. "Only falsehood does." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he had carried since childhood whenever he felt cornered. "She told me Dad confided in her," he said. "That they talked about legacy, about wanting another child connected to him." The words hung in the air between us. I felt no surge of anger. Only clarity. "Your father discussed his legacy with me in detail," I said. "We planned the trust together. We reviewed every clause. There were no hidden intentions." Michael's jaw tightened. "You are calling my wife a liar." "I am calling for evidence," I answered. Silence settled heavily. He finally removed his coat and placed it over the back of a chair, as if preparing for a longer conversation than he had expected. "What if she is telling the truth?" he asked quietly. I stepped closer, lowering my voice not in secrecy but in steadiness. "Then the verification process will confirm it," I said. "And the trust will be amended according to its terms. I have nothing to fear from truth." His eyes searched mine, looking for hesitation, for doubt. He found neither. "She says you never liked her," he added, almost defensively. I allowed myself a slow breath. "Liking someone and trusting their claim are not the same," I said. "Trust grows from consistency." He looked toward the dining table where the October Review folder rested in plain sight. "You have already built a case," he said. "I have built a record," I corrected. "There is a difference." He sank into the armchair opposite me and covered his face briefly with his hands. "This is tearing us apart," he murmured. I watched him carefully. He was not a boy anymore, yet in that moment he looked uncertain in a way I had not seen in years. "Division begins when facts are avoided," I said quietly. "Not when they are faced." He lowered his hands. "Rachel is going to schedule the medical appointment," he said after a pause. "She wants it done quickly." I nodded once. "That is wise." He studied my expression again, perhaps expecting relief, perhaps expecting triumph. I offered neither. There was no victory in this process, only resolution. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. "If this proves nothing," he said slowly, "can we move past it?" I met his gaze steadily. "If it proves nothing," I replied, "then we will know exactly what it proves." After he left, I closed the door and leaned my palm briefly against the cool wood. Outside, the wind moved through the maple tree, scattering a few more leaves across the lawn. I returned to the study and opened Harold's old calendar from the final year of his life. Each appointment had been marked carefully in blue ink. Treatment days. Follow-up consultations. Home visits. The dates Rachel had mentioned were circled in that same ink with notes about fatigue levels and medication adjustments. Facts do not argue. They remain. 2 days later, the law firm informed me that a medical confirmation had been scheduled for Friday morning at a licensed clinic selected by the court. The process would begin there. I placed the new email into the folder and closed it gently. This was no longer a matter of whispers or hallway conversations. It had moved into light. And in light, shadows either shrink or disappear entirely. Friday arrived with a stillness that felt deliberate. The sky was pale and cloudless, the kind of clear autumn morning that makes every sound sharper. I did not attend the clinic. That had been arranged intentionally through the law firm. Independent meant independent. I remained at home, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold long before I realized I had stopped drinking it. At 9:15, I glanced at the clock above the stove. The appointment had been scheduled for 9 o'clock. Somewhere across town, forms were being filled out, signatures placed on lines, questions asked in quiet examination rooms. I did not picture the details. I focused on the process. Process has structure. Structure holds steady. Around 10:40, my phone vibrated. It was an email from Mr. Mercer. The clinic had confirmed Rachel's attendance. Initial documentation would be forwarded directly to the firm within 24 hours. I exhaled slowly, not in relief but in acknowledgement. The first step had been completed. At noon, Michael called. His voice carried tension that he tried to disguise with politeness. "It is done," he said. "Rachel is exhausted." "Medical appointments often are," I replied evenly. There was a pause. "She feels like you do not trust her at all," he added. I stood by the window and watched two children ride bicycles down the sidewalk, their laughter light and unaware. "Trust is not a substitute for evidence," I said. "And evidence does not erase trust if it is real." He did not answer immediately. "She thinks you want her to fail," he said finally. "I want the truth to stand on its own," I replied. Nothing more. After we ended the call, I walked into Harold's study again. The October review folder now felt heavier in my hands, though its contents had not changed. I opened Harold's calendar one more time and traced the dates Rachel had claimed. I remembered the hospital corridor's antiseptic scent, the way Harold would lean slightly on my arm as we walked to the car. I remembered evenings when he barely had the strength to finish a bowl of soup. Memory is not dramatic. It is quiet and specific. In the late afternoon, Rachel sent another message. "This is unnecessary," she wrote. "You are dragging this out." I read the words carefully. Dragging implies delay. I had done the opposite. I set the phone aside without responding. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness. It is discipline. By Saturday morning, a preliminary notice arrived from the law firm. The medical documentation confirmed pregnancy. The report was clinical and straightforward. No elaboration. No interpretation. I read the line twice, then placed the paper on the table. Confirmation of pregnancy was only the first layer. It did not answer the deeper question. Around midday, Michael arrived again, this time with Rachel. I opened the door before they knocked. Rachel's expression was composed but tight around the edges. Michael avoided my eyes at first. We sat in the living room, the three of us arranged in careful distance. "The clinic confirmed it," Rachel said directly. "I told you I was not lying." "Pregnancy was not the point of dispute," I replied calmly. "Paternity is." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom," he said, "do we really have to keep going?" I folded my hands in my lap. "The trust requires it," I answered. Rachel leaned forward. "You are hiding behind paperwork," she said quietly. "You are refusing to accept what is right in front of you." I looked at her steadily. "What is right in front of me is a claim that affects a legal estate," I said. "It must be verified according to the document your husband and I signed together." She inhaled sharply. "Harold trusted me," she insisted. "Trust does not replace documentation," I replied. The room fell silent again. Michael finally spoke. "The next step is the testing," he said, his voice low. "It will take time." I nodded once. "Time does not change facts," I said. Rachel stood abruptly, then steadied herself. "You will regret this distance," she said softly. "You are choosing suspicion over family." I rose as well, not to confront her, but to remain level. I am choosing clarity for the sake of family, I answered. They left soon after, the front door closing with a restrained click. I remained standing in the hallway for a moment, listening to the engine of Michael's car fade down the street. The house felt steady again, as if it understood patience better than people did. I returned to the dining table and placed the preliminary report into the folder. The process had moved forward exactly as written. There were no raised voices. No accusations shouted in public. Only documentation, timelines, and a clause that required truth to be measured, not assumed. Outside, the maple tree dropped another leaf, and it drifted slowly to the ground without resistance. The waiting period after the preliminary confirmation felt longer than the days that had come before it. Time does not slow in reality, but when answers are pending, every hour carries weight. The law firm informed us that the paternity testing would be conducted through a certified laboratory 2 counties away, selected specifically to ensure neutrality. Rachel would provide the necessary medical samples under supervised conditions. For Harold's side of the verification, the firm would use preserved medical material that had been stored legally during his treatment, something Harold had consented to for research purposes. I had almost forgotten about that detail until Mr. Mercer mentioned it. Harold had always believed in planning ahead, even in illness. On Tuesday afternoon, I drove past the small church where Harold's memorial service had been held. The parking lot was empty. The maple trees along the sidewalk were nearly bare now, their branches thin against the gray sky. I did not stop the car. I did not need to. Memory travels without effort. Later that evening, Michael came by alone. He looked tired, older somehow, as though the strain of divided loyalty had begun to show in the lines around his eyes. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood. The sample was collected today, he said quietly. I nodded once. And Rachel? I asked. She feels humiliated, he answered. She says this whole process makes her feel like she is on trial. I folded my hands calmly. No one is on trial, I said. Verification protects everyone involved. He looked up at me then. What if the results are not what you expect? He asked. His voice carried something fragile in it. I met his gaze steadily. Then we will accept them, I replied. Facts do not threaten me. He studied my expression carefully, as though searching for hidden doubt. He did not find it. She believes you are trying to push her out of the family, he said. I shook my head gently. I am protecting the integrity of what your father and I built, I answered. That is not exclusion. That is responsibility. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This is tearing her apart, he murmured. I allowed a brief pause before speaking. Truth does not tear families apart, I said quietly. Deception does. He did not argue. He could not. The following days unfolded in silence. No new messages from Rachel. No dramatic confrontations. Only the quiet hum of daily life continuing around an unanswered question. I baked bread on Wednesday morning, kneading the dough with steady hands. I watered the maple tree once more before the ground hardened with frost. Each ordinary action grounded me. Stability is not loud. It is consistent. On Friday afternoon, an email arrived from Mr. Mercer stating that laboratory analysis was complete and the official report would be delivered in person the following Monday morning. I read the message once, then closed my laptop gently. The result existed now, sealed in an envelope somewhere across town. For 3 days it would remain unopened. Knowledge waiting to be revealed. On Sunday evening, Michael called again. His voice was subdued. We meet tomorrow at 10, he said. All of us. I agreed. When I hung up, I walked into Harold's study and sat in his chair. I looked at the framed photograph of him at Lake Erie, the wind lifting his hair slightly as he smiled into the distance. I thought about the way he had insisted on careful wording in every legal document, about the afternoon he had explained to Michael why integrity mattered more than appearance. Integrity is quiet. It does not rush to defend itself. It waits. Monday arrived clear and cold. I dressed simply in a navy blue sweater and pearl earrings Harold had given me on our 30th anniversary. When I arrived at the law firm, Rachel and Michael were already seated in the conference room. Rachel's posture was rigid, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Michael avoided my eyes. Mr. Mercer entered carrying a sealed envelope. He placed it on the table between us without ceremony. "The results are conclusive," he said evenly. The room grew very still. I did not reach for the envelope. I did not look at Rachel. I waited. Because whatever lay inside that paper, it would not be a whisper. It would be a fact. Mr. Mercer did not raise his voice when he opened the envelope. He slit it carefully with a small silver letter opener, removed the stapled pages, and adjusted his glasses before reading. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the heating system in the ceiling. Rachel sat upright, her fingers intertwined so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. Michael stared at the table, as if bracing himself for impact without knowing which direction it would come from. "The laboratory analysis confirms pregnancy," Mr. Mercer began evenly. No one reacted. That had already been established. He turned the page. However, the paternity comparison between the preserved medical sample of Harold Carter and the submitted fetal genetic material shows zero probability of biological relation. The words did not echo. They did not explode. They simply settled into the air, clear and irreversible. Zero probability. I did not look at Rachel immediately. I watched Michael instead. His head lifted slowly, confusion crossing his face before understanding followed. "That is not possible," Rachel said quietly, her voice thinner than before. Mr. Mercer kept his tone steady. "The testing was conducted under certified chain of custody procedures. The findings are conclusive." Rachel shook her head once, as if trying to dislodge the sentence from reality. "There must be a mistake," she insisted. "Tests can be wrong." Mr. Mercer placed the report on the table between us. "This laboratory maintains a documented accuracy rate exceeding 99.9%, he replied. "If you wish to request a secondary verification, that option remains available. However, the current result stands." I folded my hands calmly on the table. I did not lean forward. I did not speak over anyone. I allowed silence to do what silence often does. It revealed what noise hides. Michael turned to Rachel slowly. "You told me," he said, his voice strained but controlled. "You said Dad had confided in you." Rachel's eyes moved between us, searching for footing. "He did," she said quickly. "We talked about legacy. About family." "Legacy does not alter biology," I said quietly. The room stilled again. Rachel's composure began to fracture, not with tears, but with impatience. "You never accepted me," she said, looking directly at me. "You always kept me at a distance. This was my way of securing a future for my child." The sentence hung unfinished, as if she had realized too late what she had admitted. Michael's expression shifted. "Securing a future," he repeated slowly. She pressed her lips together. "I was thinking ahead," she said. "The trust is substantial. It protects generations." "I thought," she stopped. I looked at her evenly. "You thought attaching your pregnancy to Harold's name would grant immediate recognition under the existing clause," I said. "It was not accusation. It was deduction." She did not answer. Michael pushed back slightly from the table, his chair legs scraping softly against the floor. "Was any of it true?" he asked her. "Did you ever have those conversations with Dad?" Rachel hesitated long enough for the answer to become visible without words. "We spoke occasionally," she said. "He was kind to me. Kindness is not confession." I stood slowly, smoothing the sleeve of my sweater. "The trust remains unchanged," I said calmly. "Any child born to you and Michael will be recognized under the proper lineage clause. Nothing has been denied. Only corrected." Rachel's shoulders stiffened. You humiliated me, she said. I met her gaze directly. I verified a claim that altered a legal estate, I replied. That is not humiliation. It is responsibility. Mr. Mercer gathered the papers neatly. Given the findings, he said, the file will be closed unless a secondary challenge is requested within 30 days. Rachel did not respond. Michael remained seated, staring at the report as if it were written in a language he had never learned to read. When I turned to leave, he looked up at me. There was no anger in his expression now. Only realization. Mom, he said quietly. I paused but did not step closer. Truth does not whisper, I said softly. It stands. I walked out of the conference room without hurry, the sound of my heels measured against the polished hallway floor. Outside, the air was crisp and cold, carrying the clean scent of late autumn. I drew a steady breath. The storm that had begun in a hallway whisper had ended in a single printed line, zero probability. Facts do not shout. They simply remain. The drive home from the law firm felt quieter than the one that had taken me there. The sky was the same pale blue, the trees just as bare, yet something fundamental had shifted. A whisper had tried to become a legacy. A claim had tried to rewrite history. And now it had dissolved into a single phrase on official letterhead. Zero probability. I did not replay the meeting in my mind. I did not search for moments I could have softened. Truth does not require polishing. When I stepped inside the house, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner and old wood greeted me. I placed my purse on the entry table and walked slowly into Harold's study. His chair remained angled slightly toward the window, just as he had left it. I sat down and rested my hands on the desk, letting the stillness settle around me. There was no victory in what had happened. Only correction. Later that evening, Michael arrived alone. He stood in the doorway longer than usual before speaking. She is staying with her sister for a few days, he said quietly. I nodded once. That may be wise, I replied. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His shoulders looked heavier than they had that morning. I did not see it, he admitted. I did not want to. I studied his face carefully. There was no anger there now. Only disappointment. It is difficult to question someone you love, I said. Especially when questioning feels like betrayal. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood. Why would she do that? He asked. The question was not directed at me alone. It was directed at the unraveling of trust. I poured 2 glasses of water and placed one in front of him. Fear often disguises itself as ambition, I said quietly. And ambition, when unchecked, can turn into strategy. He absorbed that without responding. After a moment he asked, Do you hate her? The word hung between us. I shook my head slowly. No, I answered. Hate clouds judgment. I prefer clarity. He looked up at me then, and for the first time since this began, his expression softened. You never raised your voice, he said. You never accused her in front of anyone. I folded my hands calmly. Noise weakens position, I replied. Facts strengthen it. He gave a small, almost reluctant nod. The trust remains the same, he asked. Yes, I said. Any child you and Rachel have together will be acknowledged properly. Nothing was taken away. Only misrepresented. He exhaled slowly, as though that reassurance mattered more than he had admitted before. Outside, the wind brushed against the siding, carrying with it the faint scent of approaching winter. Change had come quietly, but it had come completely. Over the next few days, the house felt steadier. Rachel did not contact me. No new claims surfaced. The law firm sent a final notice confirming the closure of the file. I placed it into the October review folder and slid the folder into the safe. Documentation, preserved. Not for retaliation. For record. On Sunday morning, I walked beneath the maple tree and noticed that nearly all the leaves had fallen. The branches stood exposed now, unhidden, reaching upward without decoration. Exposure does not destroy a tree. It prepares it for the next season. Michael returned that afternoon with a different posture. Not defensive. Not conflicted. Simply thoughtful. "We are going to counseling," he said. "Rachel and I. There are things we need to address." I inclined my head slightly. "That is wise," I replied. He hesitated before adding, "I am sorry I doubted you." I met his eyes steadily. "Doubt is natural when trust is shaken," I said. "What matters is what you do after the truth arrives." He stood and embraced me briefly. It was not dramatic. It was not theatrical. It was grounding. When he left, I closed the door gently and returned to the study one final time that evening. I looked at Harold's photograph and allowed myself a quiet breath. Legacy is not built on whispers. It is built on integrity repeated over years. Rachel had attempted to secure a future through misdirection. Instead, she had revealed something else entirely. Strength does not need to shout. It waits, it verifies, and it stands when called. As the sun lowered behind the houses across the street, the room filled with a soft amber light. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the fading daylight. Some lies collapse loudly. Others fade without sound. What remains is not the echo of accusation, but the quiet certainty that truth does not require defense. It requires patience.